Parathyroid gland. What is parathyroid gland? The prefix para means alongside or near because these glands are near the thyroid. It is derived from endoderm of pouches 3 and 4. The cranial external parathyroid forms from pouch 3, while the caudal internal parathyroid forms from pouch 4. This illustration here shows the posterior view of the neck where it has the left and right lobe of the thyroid gland. So as what you can see, na ay small pea size kaning color yellow 4 kabuok, mo na siya ang gitawag nga parathyroid glands. So there are two cell types of the parathyroid glands. These are the principal cells, also called as chief cells, and the oxyphilic cells, also known as acidophils. First, we have the principal cells. So it is more prevalent in the parathyroid gland and it synthesizes parathyroid hormone. What is PTH or parathyroid hormone? So it elevates and maintains normal calcium concentration in blood and interstitial fluid. It also enhances the resorption. So resorption is the act or process of resorbing of calcium from bones and absorption of calcium across kidney and intestinal epithelia. And the second one is the oxyphilic cells. Observe either singly or in small groups interspersed between chief cells. Their abundant cytoplasmic area is filled with numerous large, often bizarre-shaped mitochondria. This illustration here represents the micrograph of a parathyroid gland. Chief cells appear as a dark purple in an H&E stain, while the oxyphil cells staining as a lighter pink. They are polygonal in shape with a round nucleus. What is adrenal gland? The prefix ad is a Latin word which means near, while the prefix rene means kidney. So adrenal gland simply means near kidney, and it is composed of an outer cortex derived from intermediate mesoderm and an inner medulla derived from neural crest ectoderm. This is an adrenal gland of a horse. It has two distinct regions apparent histologically. The outer region, the adrenal cortex, encircles the medulla. What is adrenal cortex? It is composed of three functionally distinct layers or zones. The layers from outermost to innermost are the zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and lastly is the zona reticularis. Zona glomerulosa. It constitutes the outer cortex. The outer cortex is the source of mineralocorticoids, aldosterone, and corticosterone. This zone develops in the perinatal period as the last one or as the last of the cortical zones to appear. The zona glomerulosa is the outermost layer of the adrenal cortex. These epithelial cells are arranged into tight clusters and trabeculae. The intervening stroma of the adrenal gland consists primarily of small capillaries. Zona fasciculata is composed of radiating columns of spherical cells separated by sinusoids and bundled as fascicles. These cells produce glucocorticoids, cortisol, and cortisone. The zona vesiculata is the middle layer of the adrenal cortex. These epithelial cells are arranged into cords and have abundant vacuolated cytoplasm. The intervening stroma of the adrenal gland consists primarily of small capillaries. Zona reticularis is formed by polyhedral cells arranged as a network of anastomosing cords and plates separated by large sinusoids. These cells synthesize small amounts of androgens. Cells of the zona reticularis are the oldest of the inner cortex, and apoptotic cells are frequently observed. The zona reticularis is the innermost layer of the adrenal cortex and directly abuts the adrenal medulla. These epithelial cells are trabeculae with less cytoplasmic vacuolation than the zona fasciculata. Adrenal medulla. What is adrenal medulla? Primary hormones secreted are norepinephrine and epinephrine. These hormones are the molecular mediators of the fight or flight mechanism, the immediate physiologic response to fear and stress, resulting in increased heart rate and a breakdown of glycogen in skeletal muscle and liver. Medullary cells are also referred to as chromaffin cells, owing to the brown staining of cytoplasmic granules when stained with chromium salts. This illustration represents the adrenal gland of a horse. The adrenal medullary cells or the chromaffin cells are histologically distinguished by their granular basophilic cytoplasm kanang mga white arrows. Cells of the zona reticularis can be seen on the left abutting the medulla. Endocrine tissues and cells. Endocrine cells of the pancreas form islets within the exocrine pancreatic tissue. These islets vary in size from a few endocrine cells to clusters of a few hundred cells. The exocrine pancreas is derived from endoderm. So there are principal cells of the islets. It includes the alpha cells, beta cells, and the last one is the delta cells. First, we have the alpha cells. It synthesize and store glucagon and represent 5 to 30% of the islet cell population. In the pig, the number of alpha cells decreases from nearly 50% at birth to 8 to 20% in the adult. In the horse, alpha cells are located in the center of the islet, but in cattle, they tend to be peripheral. Beta cells. It synthesizes and stores insulin constituting 60 to 80% of the islet cells, 98% sa sheep. The beta cell is signaled by hyperglycemia or the elevated blood sugar, the principal signal for insulin release. Delta cells. It synthesizes and stores somatostatin or SST and represent a relatively small percentage of the islet parenchyma. SST exerts broad endocrine and neural effects. It inhibits its own secretion, the insulin and glucagon within the islet. Paraganglia. It is a small clusters of extraadrenal medullary catechol-aminogenic cells. It is composed of parenchymal cells, glomus cell, nested within a small plexus of sinusoidal capillaries called a glomus. Of the several glomera, the most studied is the carotid body. Diffuse neuroendocrine system cells, also known as DNES. These are cells scattered in the epithelium throughout the respiratory, urinary, reproductive, and digestive systems. More than 30 DNES cell types have been identified. The cytoplasm of these cells contains either peptide hormones or biogenic amines. A subcategory of DNES cells are amine precursor uptake and decarboxylation or APUD cells, which are able to take up and decarboxylate amines. Some DNES cells stain with silver and are therefore called argentaphene cells. Other endocrine cells. Adipocytes. Unilocular white adipocytes secrete leptin, a 16 kDa protein hormone that is an afferent signal to the hypothalamus, regulating energy homeostasis for the organism. Leptin is one of the inputs to the hypothalamic lipostat, the output of which affects feeding behavior. Endocrine cells of the heart. Atrial natriuretic peptide or ANP. Some cardiac myocytes synthesize and store in secretory vesicles a peptide hormone. When blood volume is increased, the stretch of the atrial myocytes during the filling of the atrium causes membrane calcium channels to open, increasing intracellular calcium concentration and triggering exocytosis of ANP or the atrial natriuretic peptide. Endocrine cells of the ovary. The endocrine tissues of the ovary are derived from mesoderm. What is internal theca cells? So it is the stromal cells adjacent to the growing follicle are transformed from fibroblast to epithelioid, steroidoigenic cells. Corpus luteum forms when follicular epithelial cells and the internal thecal cells proliferate. So proliferate means to increase in number or amount quickly. When blood volume is increased, the stretch of the atrial myocytes, endocrine cells of the placenta. Like the corpus luteum, the placenta is also a transient endocrine organ. Marked species differences of the placental endocrine role are correlated with the intimacy of the fetal-maternal tissue contact, the structure of trophoblast, and the molecular weight of the hormones. Endocrine cells of the testis. So it is derived from mesoderm. Spermatogonia arriving at the developing testis are enveloped by mesenchyme that differentiates, forming a simple columnar epithelium of sustentacular cells or the Sertoli cells. Testicular hormones target secondary sex tissues and also exert a negative feedback on GnRH or the gonadotropin releasing hormone released from hypothalamic neurons, and FSH or the follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone from the hypophyseal gonadotropes. That's all. Thank you for listening.